All right, so welcome to Maya. This is our kind of intro and what the interface looks like. So when you open up this program, here's what you're greeted with. You have a viewport, you have an outliner, you have different selection tools here, different viewport options here. Down below, you have timeline. There's nothing on this timeline. You have playback options, and you also have different tools for animation. Above, you have right here, what's highlighted is our poly modeling. This is what it opens up with. Because typically, you got to start animating, you got to start creating something from somewhere. And the most common tools to do that is with these poly modeling objects. You have curves as well, sculpting, rigging, animation, and so on down the line. We'll get into that later, more advanced stuff. You have different modes that you can be in. We are in modeling mode here, and that gives you a certain number and certain menu items up above. You have different menu items for rigging, animation, FX, and rendering. And so each one of them is just a little bit more customized, help you find the tools that you need in a quick, orderly fashion, I guess. Otherwise, if you put all of these tools out here for the world to see all the time, it can be very overwhelming, get lost a lot as far as like, where is this? Where is that? It's too much stuff. So they kind of tuck it away in these different modes. So let's get into creating something. So let's say we want to start modeling with some basic shapes. I'm going to select this right here, and automatically this pops up. Now, what do I do with that? Well, I can move it, I can rotate it, I can scale it different ways. And so let's go ahead. It's selected right now. I know it's because it's highlighted green, which means it's in object mode, which we'll get into later. Let's say I want to move this object around. I can press W on my keyboard, which also highlights this move tool. So whichever way you prefer. Then you can grab these arrows and move it however you like. You can also grab it by these planes that are right here and move it on a combination of different axes. And so when I select this, right now, my Z-axis is selected because that is this right here. It's on Z. It's typically blue, but it's yellow. It tells me that it's highlighted. Here's my Y. Now I select that. It's typically green. I made it yellow. Now you can grab by the planes right here and move it along this direction, or I can grab it and move it along this direction, or like that. And so it kind of stabilizes it on the Y-axis and lets me move it about left to right or back. So you kind of get that out. This right here stabilizes it. It's red, stabilizes it on the X-axis, and I can move it anywhere Y and Z, up and down and left and right. And so same thing here, same basic concept. So that's moving things around. We want to rotate something. Right now, there's no real point in rotating this ball, but let's say you wanted to rotate it a certain way to manipulate something. I'm going to press E as an echo on the keyboard, and there I have this highlighted now, and I can rotate this how I'd like. You'll notice that there's also an item that's highlighted in this outliner because once I created it, this sphere popped up here. It keeps inventory of all the things that you have in your viewport. Let's say I can rotate it along these different lines. You see the kind of like you did before. You see the color coordinated lines here for rotating. You can grab it from either one of those axes and rotate around, or you can have free reign by grabbing somewhere in the gray area, and you can rotate wherever you want just by dragging and rolling around. So there's that. And say I want to scale this up, make this bigger. I'm going to press R on the keyboard, and I can now rotate it different directions, or sorry, scale it in different directions here. Let me Control Z back a little bit and get this in a formation that makes sense here. So R, it looks a lot like the move tool, except without the arrows. Now I have these blocks. And so I have X, Y, Z. I can scale it just on any one of those. I'm going to Control Z back. Scale it any of those directions, or same thing with the planes. can lock it on one and flatten it out. So now I have a pancake. Or I can go right in the middle right here and drag and scale the whole thing up, make it larger, right? So there we go. And as I move object around or add more objects, click on that. Now I've created a cube. And I can use W, I can move that around, and everything gets created at the 0 point in the world right here. This is the total center of all the things that you're creating. And so let's say I want to scale this up. You notice that I don't have as many fancy green lines on this as I do here, because it by default creates these using just one division for each side here. And I can go around about altering that by clicking, and this might pop up automatically for you, but I can click on Attribute Editor, and I can now manipulate these by using this. And so I can click on the cube, pcube1, which is what this object is, it says right here. And I can say, hey, I want that over here at 5. And maybe I want it up here at 5. And so you read these as X, Y, Z. So let's put this at 5. And now it's overlapping my other object. Well, that's fine, but let's say I want to move this out of the way now. There. They don't harm or do anything to each other. You can rotate it also based on very specific numbers as well. You can see that it's scaled to whatever I did here. As I scale it again, you'll see those numbers change in the attribute editor. If there's a certain scale or certain size that you want, then you can say, I want that 5. I want this, well, maybe 10. And I want this 8. Now I got something different, right? So different ways that you can manipulate your shape here. These are other controls we'll get into later, more rendering type controls. And then I'm going to go to Polycube 1. And here's my width, and I can adjust that here as well. Depth. And I can change the subdivisions. We talked about these not having as many lines as this. When I look at this and I go to Polysphere, I can see my radius is at 1. I can adjust that. My axes are at 20, and I can change that. Notice how it reshapes a round object when you change that. These are all points that you can bend an object at. So let's say it's there. And I can change this. And notice how it also changes the shape and how that looks. So there's different ways that you can manipulate the shapes here. Now with the cube, I go to Polycube 1, it only has 1. But as I do this, okay, I can now have more points that I can actually grab and manipulate and change how I want to later if I want to get more detailed modeling happening. So these are the basics as far as creating shapes and being able to manipulate shapes, scale, rotate, and move. And that's basically it for now. Just you can experiment and play around with shapes however you need to, but we'll get into more later. So thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.